Heart monitors flatlined, but the real chaos had only just begun. When an arrogant ER chief screamed at a veteran nurse to get out of his trauma bay, he had no idea he'd just signed his own professional death warrant. 10 seconds later, the military breached the doors. The emergency department at St. Jude's Medical Center in downtown Chicago was a meat grinder on a Friday night. Under the harsh, sterile hum of fluorescent lights, the air was thick with the metallic scent of copper, iodine, and the stale sweat of panicked bodies. Paramedics shoved gurneys through the double doors with desperate urgency, shouting vitals over the agonizing wails of the injured. It was a symphony of modern tragedy, and Abigail Hayes knew every note by heart. Abigail Abbey, to the few staff members she actually spoke to, was a senior trauma nurse. At 34, she had a quiet, unnerving stillness about her that most of the younger nurses found intimidating. While they scrambled and panicked during mass casualty incidents, Abby moved with the cold, calculated precision of a machine. She never raised her voice. She never hesitated. She simply did the work. Her personnel file stated she had transferred in from a civilian hospital in Virginia 3 years ago, looking for a change of pace. It was a believable lie. Dr. Harrison Gallagher, however, did not care about Abby's precision. He was the chief of emergency medicine, a man whose ego entered the room a full 5 seconds before his physical body did. Gallagher was an Ivy League pedigree wrapped in a custom-tailored white coat, a man who viewed nurses not as colleagues, but as easily replaceable medical equipment. He was brilliant on paper, yet catastrophically rigid in practice. He operated strictly by the textbook, utterly devoid of the street-level instincts required to keep people alive when the textbook caught fire. At 11:42 p.m., the radio on the triage desk crackled with a frantic voice. "Street Judes, this is Medic 41. We are inbound with a John Doe, mid-30s. Severe thoracic trauma, found unresponsive near the waterfront docks. Blood pressure is tanking, 70/40. Heart rate 145. He's bleeding out from a puncture wound to the upper left quadrant, but we can't identify the entry mechanism. ETA 2 minutes. Bay 4! Gallagher barked, snapping his gloves onto his hands. Let's go, people! I want a central line kit ready, 2 liters of lactated ringers wide open, and get the mass transfusion protocol on standby. Hayes, prep for immediate chest tube insertion. Abby stood by the stainless steel tray, her eyes locked on the sliding doors. Doctor, if the mechanism of injury is unknown and he was found at the docks, we should hold on the ringers until we can assess for chemical contaminants or specialized coagulants. Gallagher shot her a venomous glare. I don't pay you to hypothesize, Abigail. I pay you to hang the fluids. He's hypotensive. He needs volume. Lactated ringers contains calcium, Abby said, her voice terrifyingly calm. If he's been exposed to certain synthetic hemostatic agents used in industrial or— Hang the damn bag, Hayes! Gallagher roared, his face flushing crimson. Before Abby could respond, the paramedics burst through the doors, driving the gurney forward with their full body weight. The patient was a ghost. His skin was the color of wet ash, his breathing reduced to wet, shallow gasps. His clothes had been violently cut away, revealing a torso heavily scarred from previous older traumas. But it was the fresh wound that drew everyone's eyes. It wasn't a standard gunshot wound or a knife puncture. The flesh around the entry point was cauterized in a perfect circle, oozing a strange, thick black fluid that smelled faintly of ozone and sulfur. Abby's breath hitched. She recognized that smell. She recognized the burn pattern. High-velocity flechette, depleted uranium core, specialized ordnance. Her eyes darted to the patient's right forearm. Half hidden beneath a smear of drying blood was a tattoo, a seemingly meaningless string of numbers, and a stylized constellation. It was a JSOC identifier. Specifically, an elite Black Ops extraction unit. This wasn't a random dock worker. This was a Tier 1 operator, and the black fluid seeping from his chest was a proprietary military-grade coagulant known as Zeus. It was designed to keep a soldier from bleeding out in the field, but it had a fatal flaw. If it mixed with the calcium in standard lactated ringers IV fluid, it would instantly crystallize, turning the patient's bloodstream into concrete. It would cause a massive, irreversible pulmonary embolism in seconds. Transfer him on 3, Gallagher shouted, grabbing the backboard. 1, 2, 3. The The team hoisted the massive man onto the trauma bed. The monitors immediately began screaming, flashing angry red numbers. BP is 60/30. A junior nurse panicked. He's crashing. Push the ringers! Now! Gallagher commanded, grabbing a scalpel to begin the chest tube incision. A junior nurse reached for the IV line connected to the bag of lactated ringers, her hand shaking as she moved to open the roller clamp. Abby moved faster than anyone in the room could process. She lunged across the bed, her hand clamping down on the IV tubing with a vice-like grip, physically ripping the line away from the patient's catheter. "Do not push that fluid," Abby ordered, her voice echoing off the tile walls. It wasn't a request, it was a tactical command. Gallagher froze, his scalpel hovering an inch above the patient's ribs. The entire trauma bay went dead silent, save for the frantic beeping of the heart monitor. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" Gallagher's voice was a dangerous, trembling whisper. "Have you lost your absolute mind, Abigail? If you push lactated ringers into this man's veins, you will kill him in 10 seconds, Abby said, holding her ground. She locked eyes with Gallagher, refusing to blink. He has a synthetic coagulant in his system. Look at the wound margin. Look at the viscosity of the blood. It's an exothermic chemical seal. You need to use normal saline, and you cannot insert that chest tube until we neutralize the site with a sodium bicarbonate flush, or you will trigger a localized explosive reaction. Gallagher stared at her, his ego completely overriding whatever logic she was presenting. To him, this was a subordinate openly humiliating him in front of his entire staff. "You are a nurse," Gallagher spat, stepping closer to her. "You change bedpans, you follow orders, you do not diagnose, and you certainly do not physically assault a medical team during a critical code. Dr. Gallagher, I am trying to keep you from committing accidental homicide," Abby said, her tone icy. "Switch to normal saline." "Security!" Gallagher bellowed over his shoulder, his face purple with rage. "I want this woman removed from my floor immediately." He turned his furious gaze back to Abby. "Get out! Get out of my trauma bay right now! You are fired, Abigail! You are finished in this hospital. Get the hell out." Abby looked at the dying man on the table. She looked at the junior nurse trembling with the IV line. She had sworn to leave her past behind. She had sworn she was done with the war, but the war had just bled out onto her linoleum floor. Slowly, deliberately, Abby let go of the IV tubing. "You're making a mistake, Harrison," she warned softly. "Get out!" he screamed, pointing at the sliding glass doors. Abby stepped backward, raising her hands, and walked backward, out of Trauma Bay 4. As the glass doors slid shut, sealing Gallagher inside with his dying ego, she didn't leave the ER. She stood firmly at the central nurse's station, her eyes glued to the monitors. She began silently counting down in her head. 10, 9, 8. She knew exactly who this man was, which meant she knew exactly who was coming for him. Outside the hospital, the relentless Chicago rain hammered against the pavement, washing the city's grime into the gutters. Inside the ER, the tension was suffocating. Abby stood motionless at the central desk, arms crossed, ignoring the bewildered stares of her colleagues. In Bay 4, Gallagher was barking orders, desperately trying to stabilize the John Doe. He had switched to normal saline, not because Abby had told him to, but because the bag of ringers she had ripped away had fallen to the floor and burst. He was blindly attempting to insert the chest tube, completely unaware of the chemical landmine he was about to dig into. 4, 3, 2. The automatic sliding doors at the emergency ambulance bay didn't just open, they were blown off their tracks. A deafening crash echoed through the waiting room as the heavy glass shattered, raining down on the entrance mat. The screams of waiting patients and staff pierced the air, immediately silenced by the overwhelming, terrifying presence that flooded into the corridor. They didn't look like police officers. They didn't have shiny badges or blue uniforms. They were a nightmare, painted in matte black. 6 men, heavily armored in state-of-the-art tactical plate carriers, poured into the emergency room, moving with synchronized, predatory efficiency. They wore no insignia, no flags, no name tapes. Their faces were obscured by balaclavas and the unblinking lenses of panoramic night vision goggles pushed up on their ballistic helmets. They carried short-barreled rifles, held tight to their chests, their fingers resting dangerously close to the triggers. "Secure the perimeter," a deep, gravelly voice commanded. In less than 5 seconds, the hospital's armed security guards were disarmed, their hands forced flat against the walls. The tactical operators spread out, locking down every exit, physically blocking the elevators, and seizing control of the trauma wing's communication hub. The ER had been taken hostage by a ghost unit. From the center of the formation, the commanding officer stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man, his tactical vest loaded with enough ordnance to level a city block. He pulled down his balaclava, revealing a scarred, hard-set face, icy blue eyes, and a jawline carved from granite. Major Elias Grant. He surveyed the frozen, terrified medical staff, his eyes scanning the room with thermal-like precision until they locked onto the only person in the room who wasn't cowering. Abby stood exactly where she was, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes meeting Grant's with an unspoken acknowledgement. Before Grant could speak, the glass doors of Bay 4 slid open. Dr. Gallagher stormed out, his scrubs covered in John Doe's blood, his face twisted in indignant fury. He was so blinded by his own authority that he completely failed to register the heavy artillery aimed in his general direction. "What is the meaning of this?" Gallagher bellowed, marching straight toward Major Grant. "This is a hospital. You cannot just barge in here with weapons. I am the chief of emergency medicine, and I demand to know who authorized—" "Quiet," Grant said. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a physical blade. It held the weight of a man who was used to ordering airstrikes, not arguing with civilians. Gallagher stopped in his tracks, momentarily taken aback, before his arrogance flared up again. "Listen to me, soldier. I have a critical patient in there, and I don't have time for whatever training exercise this is. Furthermore, I have a rogue, insubordinate nurse standing right there who needs to be arrested for assault." Gallagher aggressively pointed a blood-stained finger directly at Abby. "Remove her from my ER immediately." Major Grant didn't even look at Gallagher. He didn't blink. He slowly turned his massive frame, stepping past the furious doctor as if Gallagher were nothing more than a piece of broken furniture in his path. Grant walked straight toward the central nurse's station, stopping 2 feet in front of Abby. The entire ER watched in breathless silence. The heavily armed operators behind Grant instantly shifted their stances, lowering their weapons to a resting position, their attention entirely focused on the lone nurse in the scrubs. Gallagher scoffed, taking a step forward. "Did you not hear me? I told you to get her out of—" "Shut your mouth!" Grant snapped over his shoulder, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal warning. He turned his attention back to Abby. The hardness in his eyes softened, replaced by a profound, unwavering respect. Grant drew himself up to his full height, brought his right hand up sharply, and rendered a flawless textbook military salute. "Captain Hayes," Grant said, his voice echoing in the dead-silent hospital wing. Gallagher's jaw dropped. The junior nurses stared in open-mouthed shock. Grant lowered his hand. He turned his head slightly, glaring sideways at the sputtering, bewildered ER chief. "Get out?" Grant repeated, his tone laced with venomous disgust as he looked at Gallagher. "You told her to get out?" Grant stepped closer to the doctor, towering over him. "You don't talk to her. You don't look at her. And from this second forward, if you have to address her, you will call her by her name. And her name is Captain Abigail Hayes, former Joint Special Operations Command, Tier 1 medical lead. She has pulled more operators out of hell than you've had hot dinners, Doctor." Gallagher stammered, all the color draining from his face. She's a registered nurse. She is the only person on this miserable planet qualified to save the man bleeding out on your table," Grant interrupted, stepping back and turning to Abby. "Captain," Grant said softly, the urgency finally bleeding through his stoic facade. "Subject 82 is dying. We took heavy fire on Exfil. He's carrying intel that prevents a domestic strike in 48 hours. The local trauma protocols are going to kill him." Abby looked past Grant, her eyes locking onto the John Doe through the glass of Bay 4. The monitor inside was blaring a continuous, high-pitched alarm. Ventricular fibrillation. He was slipping away. She didn't need to hide anymore. The civilian charade was over. Abby reached up and ripped the plastic hospital ID badge off her scrubs, tossing it onto the desk. She looked at Major Grant, the cold, calculating operator returning to the surface. "Clear the bay," Abby ordered, her voice completely different now, authoritative, sharp, undeniable. "Get Gallagher out of my sight. I need my tactical medical kit from your vehicle, Major. And I need a sternal saw. Now. You heard the captain! Grant roared at his men. Move! The trauma bay transformed instantly from a civilian medical facility into a militarized forward operating base. Two masked operators physically grabbed Dr. Harrison Gallagher by his shoulders, lifting him off the floor and dragging him backward out of the glass doors. Gallagher sputtered, threatening lawsuits and federal charges, but his protests died under the terrifying, silent stares of the heavily armed men. Major Elias Grant kicked a heavy black Pelican case across the bloody linoleum. It slammed against the base of the surgical table. Captain Abigail Hayes dropped to her knees, popping the latches with practiced, mechanical, and fluid speed. Inside the tactical case laid a terrifying array of classified surgical instruments and proprietary chemical stabilizers that did not exist in any civilian hospital on the continent. Abby grabbed a fully filled syringe containing a bright orange liquid. It was a synthesized neutralizing enzyme explicitly engineered to dissolve the coagulant without triggering a fatal pulmonary embolism. She stood up, slamming the needle directly into the black, thick substance oozing from the wounded man's chest. The reaction was instantaneous. The hardened, carbonized rim of the wound hissed, emitting a thin trail of white smoke as the synthetic seal violently dissolved away. Pads! Abby screamed over the frantic, loud wail of the electrocardiogram. The patient, subject 80, was in full ventricular fibrillation. His heart was merely quivering, failing to pump blood to his dying brain. One of the tactical medics stepped forward, ripping the defib pads from their packaging and slapping them onto the broad, scarred chest. Clear, Abby commanded. The medic pressed the button. The massive frame convulsed off the stainless steel table, slamming back down with a wet thud. The monitor continued to scream its flat, jagged red line. The chemical blockade was clear, but the heart remained completely still. Outside the glass, Gallagher pressed his face against the barrier, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and professional outrage. He pounded his fist against the reinforced pane. You are killing him, he muffled through the glass. You need to crack the chest. Abby ignored the arrogant doctor completely. She reached into the Pelican case and withdrew a heavy, battery-powered sternal saw. Major, hold his shoulders down. When I breach the sternum, the residual pressure from the thoracic cavity is going to violently expel trapped blood. Do not let him slip off this medical table, Abby firmly barked. Grant braced his massive hands against the dying soldier's shoulders, his face an impenetrable mask of absolute focus. Abby powered the saw. The high-pitched whine of the oscillating blade drowned out the chaos of the emergency room. She positioned the metal teeth at the top of the man's sternum and pushed downward. Bone dust and dark, coagulated blood sprayed across her visor as the blade effortlessly chewed through the breastbone. In less than 10 seconds, she had vertically bisected the ribcage. She dropped the heavy saw, immediately jamming a metal retractor into the fresh, bleeding gap, cranking it open. The patient's chest cavity was a horrifying swamp of dark crimson fluid. The flechette round had narrowly missed the descending aorta but had shattered a pulmonary vein. Suction! Give me maximum pressure, Abby ordered. The tactical medic handed her the thick plastic tubing. She plunged it deep into the chest, frantically clearing the pooling blood to locate the source of the hemorrhage. As the Red Sea slowly drained, a metallic glint caught the harsh overhead surgical lights. It was not a bullet fragment. It was a smooth, titanium-cased cylinder, roughly the size of a small standard battery, deeply embedded. There is the package, Major Grant said, his deep voice carrying a sudden, grim finality. Retrieve it, Captain. That is the primary objective. The intelligence inside that cylinder contains the activation codes for the sleeper cells currently positioned along the eastern seaboard. If we do not secure it, thousands of innocent civilians will die before sunrise. Abby stared at the titanium cylinder, lodged precariously against the shivering wall of the left ventricle. If I pull this out, he bleeds out in 30 seconds, she replied. I need to clamp the torn vein first, or 80 goes home dead very quickly. We are out of time, Abigail, Grant urged, stepping closer, the weight of the impending domestic strike pressing heavily on his broad shoulders. Retrieve the drive. Abby glared at him, her eyes burning with fierce defiance. I am not a butcher, Elias. I save lives. I do not sacrifice them. She grabbed a pair of curved surgical clamps, diving her hands bare into the hot, slit cavity of the man's chest. Her fingers blindly navigated the complex, slippery anatomy of the heart, feeling for the lacerated pulmonary vein. She found the torn soft tissue, instantly sliding the heavy metal clamp securely over it completely. With the bleeding temporarily halted, Abby carefully gripped the titanium cylinder with heavy forceps. She pulled, it resisted, tangled in damaged muscle fibers, before finally popping free with a sickening squelch. She handed the blood-soaked drive directly to Major Grant. Primary objective secured. Grant confirmed, slipping the drive into a secure, shielded pouch on his tactical vest. But the monitor above them suddenly flatlined, a solid, unbroken green line. The alarm shifted to a continuous, agonizing drone. The patient's heart had stopped entirely. The trauma bay fell completely silent, save for the loud mechanical wail of life support systems. "No, you don't," Abby whispered fiercely. She didn't hesitate. She plunged both hands back into the open chest cavity, physically grasping the man's still, muscular heart. She began manual internal cardiac massage, squeezing the organ with rhythmic, desperate force. 1, 2, 3, 4. Squeeze, release. Squeeze, release. Her arms ached, her scrubs soaked in blood, but her rhythm was flawless. "Push 1 milligram of epinephrine," she shouted at the medic. "And get ready to hit him with the paddles again. 30 joules internal. Give me the sterile spoons." The medic scrambled, quickly swapping external pads for internal defib paddle attachments. Outside the surgical bay, the civilian medical staff watched in absolute, paralyzed awe. Dr. Gallagher stood frozen, his arrogant demeanor utterly shattered. He was witnessing a level of trauma medicine that he could not comprehend, performed by a woman he had just fired for incompetence. He watched Abigail Hayes, a nurse he had treated like dirt, literally holding a man's life in the palm of her blood-soaked hands. "Spoons are hot," the medic yelled, placing the metal paddles directly against the exposed heart muscle. Abby pulled her hands back. "Clear!" The electric shock violently jolted the organ. "Nothing. Flatline." "Again!" Abby screamed, her voice cracking with raw, unyielding determination. "Charge to 40 joules. Do it now." The machine whined as it gathered a lethal electrical charge. "Clear!" The medic triggered the paddles. The heart seized. For a terrifying, agonizing second, the monitor displayed nothing but a chaotic, meaningless static line. Then, a sharp spike. A pause. Another spike. The rhythm was erratic, incredibly weak, but it was there. The green line jumped, forming the beautiful, jagged peaks of a sinus rhythm. The heart was beating on its own. Abby slumped back against the counter, exhaling heavily and very slowly. "Pressure is rising," the medic reported, his voice tight with absolute disbelief. "Heart rate stabilizing at 90 beats per minute. He is holding." Major Grant stared at the monitor, then slowly turned his gaze down to Abby. A rare, genuine smile briefly cracked his hardened features. "Outstanding work, Captain," Grant said quietly. He tapped the communication relay attached to his shoulder harness. "Command, this is Viper 1. The package is secure, and the carrier is stable. We need immediate medevac extraction from the roof of St. Jude's. Prep the surgical suite on the bird. We move out right away now." The operators moved with terrifying efficiency. They transferred the unconscious, heavily sedated soldier onto a specialized tactical stretcher, securing his open chest cavity with a rigid, sterile dome. They packed up the Pelican case, erasing every trace of their advanced medical intervention. Grant turned to the doors, signaling his men to move. As the glass doors slid open, Gallagher stumbled backward, making way for the imposing military unit. Grant stopped right in front of the ER chief. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He simply looked down at Gallagher with cold, absolute pity of a true apex predator standing tall. "You are a very small man, Dr. Gallagher," Grant said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You rely on a title to demand respect because your actions could never earn it. You almost killed a national hero tonight because you couldn't handle a woman knowing more than you." Gallagher opened his mouth to speak, but the words withered and died in his throat. Grant stepped past him, his heavy boots echoing down the corridor. He stopped and looked back at Abby, who was slowly peeling off her blood-soaked latex surgical gloves. "You coming, Captain? Or just staying here forever?" Abby stood in the center of the devastated trauma bay. She looked at the sterile, white walls of the hospital. She had spent 3 years trying to hide from the adrenaline, the blood, and the crushing responsibility of the shadows. But tonight proved that she could never truly escape who she was. She was not Abigail Hayes, civilian registered nurse. She was a Tier 1 tactical surgeon, and her country still needed her. She looked at the discarded plastic name badge resting on the floor near Gallagher's expensive leather shoes. She stepped on it, crushing the cheap plastic into pieces. Without looking back at the stunned hospital staff or the ruined ER chief, Abby walked out of the glass doors. She fell in line perfectly behind Major Grant, her posture rigid, her head held high. The tactical unit swept through the emergency room, exiting through the shattered ambulance bay doors as quickly as they had arrived. The sound of heavy rotor blades suddenly battered the hospital roof, rattling the windows and drowning out the wailing sirens approaching from the city streets. In less than 3 minutes, the ghost unit vanished into the stormy Chicago night, leaving behind total, absolute silence. Dr. Gallagher collapsed, realizing he had witnessed true, absolute power. If you loved this intense story of hidden heroes and medical drama, please hit that like button. Share this incredible tale with your friends to show them that true strength doesn't always wear a white coat. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, action-packed real-life stories just like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us what you thought of Abby's epic comeback. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for our next awesome video.
Hi, my name is Tranthon, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, Get Out, the ER chief snapped, then Special Ops walked in Call Her By Name. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was the idea that true skill and character aren't always obvious at first glance. Abby stayed calm, focused, and committed to helping someone when it mattered most, even when she wasn't being treated with respect. That part of the story really makes you think about how easily people can be underestimated. Do you think Gallagher would have acted differently if he had known who Abby really was from the beginning? And which moment in the story stayed with you the longest? If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like the video or subscribe to Noble Tales for more unforgettable storytelling.